Okay guys, in this video I'm going to demystify and explain what PBR textures and image textures and image maps and all that stuff means, how to use in Blender, and how to make things look really cool. So I've got my basic 3D view here. I'm going to Shift A and add a cube. You may already have the default cube. I don't, because I have it removed from my startup file, because experienced Blender users have this strange angst and unending conflict with the default cube that we can't quite explain. But here I am bringing it back to life. So this is not in the center because my 3D cursor was out in the middle of the air for some reason. So I'm going to press Alt G to reset my location to zeros. There we go. This cube is going to be used to add a material. It's kind of just like our preview mesh to show just what the heck we're doing with the nodes and the materials. And it'll just be like our visual reference to the textures. So we're going to add a few more shapes here to help us visualize what's happening with the nodes. So I'm going to reset my 3D cursor because it's still out here in random 3D space. So Shift C to set my 3D cursor in the middle, tab into edit mode, and we're going to add another mesh to the cube. So instead of making separate objects, I want them to be the same object so that the materials will be automatically applied to the whole thing we're going to build here. Shift A, UV sphere, drag this out, so GX to move it on the X, and then Shift A, make a plane, S to scale it up really big, GZ to move it down. There we go. Tab out of edit mode. Now we have this basic plane, sphere, and cube. I'm going to get rid of my camera because it's driving me crazy and I don't need it. So select and delete. I don't need this floor grid either. That's also driving me crazy. So I'm going to open up my overlays and turn off the floor. All right, let's get our shader editor over here on the right side. So put your mouse on the very top corner where you see the crosshairs. Click and drag to the left to split this in half. You can zoom in and out if you have a mouse using your mouse wheel. Very handy. And let's change this view to the shader editor. So right there. Maybe move it in half. I don't want the side panel over here, so I'm going to press the letter N to get rid of that. Select our object here, and let's click New to add a new material. By default, it's always named material. You can name it whatever you want. And here is this crazy looking scary node thing. What is this? It's the principal BSDF. What does BSDF mean? It doesn't matter. It's really complicated and I don't care about it. What I do care about is how to use this node and what do all these inputs do. What we're going to be doing in this tutorial is I'm going to show you how to plug in image textures into these different inputs using noodles, that's what these guys are, to give us a realistic looking surface on this 3D mesh. When you Google PBR textures, you're going to find that they come in sets of image maps that really are part of like a collection. So there will be one image for the color, one image for the roughness, one image for the normals map, one for the bump and height and specular and all these different things. What do those mean? Well, they all work together in tandem to create a realistic surface with real reflection, with bumps, and all the data that you need for something to look realistic in a 3D render. So let's start building one of those now. I'm going to press Shift A, click on search, and type in IMA for image texture. Plug in that color noodle to the base color, and let's click open, and I'm going to go to my PBR folder. I've been using Blender for like 10 years, so I have a huge library built up of free downloaded textures I found all over the web. I've even made a few myself, but mostly these are from ccotextures.com, an amazing website. I love it, really cool. So I'm going to go to my favorite folder, the sci-fi folder, and I'm going to show you a cool little hack here in the browser, how to see what's inside of all these folders without having to go into each one and then click back. Click on this down arrow, change recursions to 1 level, which means it's going to look 1 level deep inside of all these folders, and it's going to show the images on the bottom. So these are images that are actually inside these folders. And by the way, please keep your textures organized. You'll thank me in 10 years. So scrolling down, I'm going to find something that catches my eye and that's kind of fun to look at, something with some color. Ooh, this one. I like this one a lot. Base color 07.jpg. Click open image. Now that image is loaded into this texture. It's going into the base color of the shader, and then that's going to the material output for the surface. And voila, over here, we have this completely realistic looking sci-fi thing. Well, it's not quite there yet. The more texture maps we add for Sci-Fi Panel 07, the better it's going to look. So let's drag this guy up a little bit, press Shift D and move this one down here. Now click open. And now if you have your textures arranged in their own folders, Blender will automatically bring you to where this image was loaded from, which in this case, I duplicated the base color node and now this is base color. So here's the other ones here for this same material. I'm going to open the glossiness, click open, and plug it into the roughness input. So glossiness, what it is black and white image data that controls the shininess of an object. The blacker or darker areas are more reflective and shiny. The whiter, brighter areas are less shiny. You can tweak the contrast with other nodes to get different looks out of it. We'll get to that later. Now I'm using Node Wrangler, which allows me to preview individual nodes at a time. If I Control-Shift-Click the base color node, I'm only seeing that with no shading or anything. If I Control-Shift-Click glossiness, I'm only seeing that. But if I want to see it the proper way, I'm going to Control-Shift-Click the principled BSDF shader here. And by the way, I am in material preview mode up here on the right. You can go to live render if you have a fast computer that can handle it, and it'll do all the ray tracing and the shadows and all that fancy stuff. And I'm going to leave it here just so because it'll look cooler. And because I have an RTX 2080 and it does a pretty sweet job. Now with spheres, I'm actually seeing all these individual little square faces. I don't like that. So let's set this to shade smooth with the object selected. Press spacebar and type in shade and choose shade smooth. That works great for rounded surfaces, but the cube looks all weird and funky now. So go to your object data properties, open your normals tab and check auto smooth. There we go. Now the sphere looks good and the cube looks good. Let's keep building on this material and add some more image nodes. Shift D, move this down. Click open. Let's open the normals map. There we go. Now we need to use another node to make normals work. So Shift A, type in normal map right there. Drop it in the middle. Plug your color data to color input and normals output to normal input. There we go. Data always moves from left to right, unless of course you have things all wonky and misarranged like this, but don't be that guy. There we go. We're going to westernize Blender by making it left to right. Technically, you need to make this node non-color data. So choose non-color. There we go. Let's add a bump map, one of my favorites. Shift D, move this down, click open. Find a height map, which most PBR sets have. There it is. Click open. We need another node for this to work. So Shift A, type in bump, drag it right on there, drag the color output to the height input. And there it is. We have some nice bumpiness. You can't see until the light hits it just right. There we go. We can kind of see like a simulation of, bumps and shapes to the thing. If I rotate my sunlight around, watch this. I'm going to click on my light, press RR. Now I'm just rotating my sun all over the place. And you can really see how the light glances off those surfaces. Ah, very nice. Cool. Okay, click on R mesh again to get back to the material. Now you can name these nodes if you really want to make things look nice by pressing the letter N for the side panel. Click on any node and you can label it. So this is the color. Click on this one. This is the roughness. This is the normal. So on and so forth. You can even color code things if you want to make things look, really cool. If that helps you organize really big, huge node trees like things that I make, you're going to need to use colors and labels a lot. All right, there's one more image map that we haven't used yet. Shift D, let's make an extra node, click open, and it is the ambient occlusion. This is kind of like micro shadows that came from the original mesh that this designer made to convert into these images. So we need to layer this with the color data. We do that by using a mix RGB. Shift A, type in mix RGB, drop it right on there, and then drag your ambient occlusion data into color number 2. And last thing here, change this to multiply. Now what this is doing is this is allowing us to layer the dark shadows from the ambient occlusion on top of the color data. So it's just giving us some extra grit, some extra cavity shadow that just makes things look a little bit nicer and more contrasty. All right, so we're basically done with a kind of entry-level PBR setup here. Next, I'll show you how to set up the texture coordinates. Let's get rid of our side panel by pressing N, zoom in a little bit. Shift A, type in COOR for texture coordinates, and then Shift A and type in mapping, M-A-P-P. There we go. So let's plug UV output right there. And then this vector data, this basically gives the kind of location, rotation, and scale data to each texture. So I'm not going to cover UV unwrapping. I know that's a huge topic in Blender. I already have 2 videos that cover that really well, at least for new users. So definitely check out those videos if you want to learn more about UV unwrapping and things like that. But this basic setup right here just kind of gives you a easy control over things. If you click and drag over the scale, you can increase your scale number altogether proportionally, X, Y, and Z. And that allows you to scale things. If you hold Shift, you can scale things with smaller values. So you can make it like a repeat a bunch for like a really big superstructure, or you can zoom way in way into the fine details of this beautiful texture. See all the bump and reflection. Yeah, cool. Let's select them all and press 1 to reset that. You can rotate it on the Z-axis, which basically just spins it around the axis point, and that central point is based on the UV unwrapping, which I'll just show you real quick in the UV editor. If I tab into edit mode and select the face of this plane, the face of this plane is literally covering the whole texture image. So yeah. With the cube, it gets a little bit more complicated. It's kind of broken up, and the sphere is spread out like a map over the texture image like that. So let's go back to shader editor, put our Z back to 0. You can move things on an X and Y basis here. You can kind of shift things up or down, left or right by playing with X, Y, and Z. And because this image is tiling, it's never going to end. It just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating forever and ever. If you don't want an image texture to repeat, change it from repeat to clip. So this is a basic PBR setup that is ready to use and reuse, and you can load other texture images in here. If you want to turn this into an asset to drag and drop into your scenes later, you can use the asset browser. You can see here I have a whole bunch of PBR setups that I've already saved and set up correctly so that I can just drag and drop and stick them on whatever I want for very easy use. I have a whole video on the basics of the asset browser, so if you want to learn about this, how to make 3D assets or material assets, it's really handy, and I definitely encourage you to start building your texture setups and saving them so that you don't have to remake them every single time. Okay, I'm going to show you a few more things. I'm going to use this texture setup that I've already pre-made, and I'm going to show you how to alter the color and the contrast of different parts of your texture. So I'm going to view it, this is kind of a darker texture. So split this over here, see the bright side of it. All right, cool. So this has black on yellow, pretty basic, right? What if we don't want yellow? What if we have a specific color scheme or we need it to match something else? Well, we can use the hue saturation node. So Shift A, type in hue, drop it right on top of the color noodle, right? Going into the color data right here. And now we can play with the hue slider, and we can change this to any hue we want. We can increase the saturation and make it a really strong color, or we can drop the saturation really low to make it a weak color, or to 0 to make no color. You also have value, which kind of brightens or darkens things. So that's a real easy way to shift the color on something to make it match something else. I'm going to press Control X to make that node go away and restore the noodle. Shift A, we also have the RGB curves right here. With this, we can increase and decrease brightness in really nice ways using the curves, which is the same as Photoshop curves. And we can even break this into RGB, red, green, blue curves to increase red, to decrease red, increase green, do all kinds of things we want to get specific color and hues and things like that. And that looks pretty cool right there. So I've got everything brightened using the C, which I'm forgetting what that stands for, I guess color altogether. And then the RGB curves have their own little tweaks going on. We can look at a before and after if we turn factor to 0 versus turn it up. We can also control the reflectivity using other nodes, such as the brightness and contrast. So if we brighten the roughness map, remember brighter means less shiny. So if we turn up brightness on the brightness node, it's very flat. It's like plastic, like paper. There's no shininess. If we go closer to 0 or even below 0, it's very dark, which means very shiny. In fact, look at this. I can see the reflection on the bottom. See, that's like a lake. Very shiny and cool. So let's turn this up a little bit. Let's put it at 0, actually. There we go. This is actually a pretty reflective material already. And we can control the contrast as well. If you use the brightness and contrast node, you do have contrast, which kind of brings the shiny and non-shiny parts closer together. Remember how contrast works. I'm going to preview this by pressing Control-Shift-Click. And watch, if I adjust my contrast, here's my brightness. And that data, of course, comes into this guy and tells it how shiny certain parts need to be. So I encourage you to play around with the curves, with the brightness and contrast. Even the color ramp node is really fun to play with to really tweak and get the most out of your images and get them to look the way you want them to look. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something useful. Comment down below. Let me know what you'd like to see more of. Be sure to subscribe, and thanks for watching. Have a good one.